Official Weather Bulletin number 80 for June the 4th. As of half midnight UTC, we have Tropical Storm Boris in the eastern Pacific. A weak tropical storm that's likely to make landfall in Mexico. Rains will be the main threat from that one. Invest 94A still churning along in the Indian Ocean, but not likely to form, at least not yet. And Invest 91W, which formed in the western Pacific just after yesterday's bulletin went out, and is slowly moving towards the west, approaching Micronesia. Looking at that first of all, the western Pacific Ocean, one or two little disturbances here and there, but the main one that's identifiable, 91W, just east of Pohnpei Island, in the eastern part of Micronesia, and slowly moving towards the west. But slow movement at the moment, not expected to develop in the next few days. The eastern Pacific Ocean remains quiet, at least the open waters, but of course we have Tropical Storm Boris, which has now formed just off the coast of Mexico, not too far from the border with Guatemala. And you can't really see it on that one, but you will be able to see it here in the North Atlantic satellite imagery as we head towards the Gulf of Mexico here, and you can see the influence from that system and all the other developments going on around there. It's a bit of a mess over in the Gulf of Mexico, a lot of cloudiness extending into the Bahamas, Cuba and the rest of the Greater Antilles, quite expansive. The Indian Ocean 94A is located just approaching Somalia now, just passing halfway between India and the African continent. Not likely to develop just yet, still a weak system. So that's what we have around the world so far. So let's take a look at the current tropical storm Boris, with 40 mile per hour winds right now and a pressure of 999 millibars. Its current position is 15.0 degrees north, 94.1 degrees west as of 12 AM UTC on June the 4th. And it's just offshore at the moment. It's been stalling in the past few days, but it's beginning to move again towards the north and is lingering just off the coast of Mexico. We anticipate landfall in the next 12 to 24 hours, possibly less than that if it really gets going. But we're not expecting much intensification, if any. Land interaction will begin to get the better of the storm and it will weaken into a tropical depression and then to a remnant low. It still remains to be seen whether we'll see the storm or what's left of it enter the Atlantic, and that'll be interesting to see. One or two of the models still saying we may see development from that. Current warnings: tropical storm warning in effect for Salina Cruz to the Mexican Guatemala border, and we have lots of rain warnings in effect, particularly severe rain warnings in effect for Chiapas and Tabasco. Those main two areas which will probably be in the path of the storm in the next day or two, but rain warnings elsewhere as well. Sea surface temperatures remain fairly warm around where the storm is. You can see 30-degree waters around that bend area where the storm is likely to hit, certainly now I would say. So 30 degrees, certainly warm enough to sustain tropical cyclone development. Extending far to the south as well, we have warm waters, and quite far to the west as well, on par with the Baja California Peninsula. In the western Pacific, we're seeing warm waters again here. Where that current system is around 28 to 29 degrees Celsius, or maybe a little bit lower than that actually, 27 to 28. Still good enough for cyclone development, but as it moves towards the west, it will become even more favourable. In the Atlantic, still remaining fairly warm there as well, particularly in the Caribbean, as you would expect for this time of year. The northern Gulf of Mexico, just a little pocket there that's not conducive for tropical cyclone development. Generally speaking, the threshold is around 26 degrees C. But a large part of the Atlantic is now warm enough to sustain cyclone development. Looking at the shear maps, towards the centre of the screen is where the current Invest 94A in the Indian Ocean is located. The shear tendency around there is fairly low amounts of shear, but all around it there are higher amounts, and those are increasing over the next few days. But where the storm is progressing towards the west, it is decreasing, so there's a small window perhaps for opportunity for this system to develop. Moving on to the eastern Pacific, you can now see the tropical storm Boris, the icon to the far right of your screen there, in a low shear environment, at least for the short term, until it moves overland. The southern Gulf of Mexico, a large amount of shear over that area, and still increasing as well. But to the west of that, the west of tropical storm Boris, still low amounts of shear there as well. If there was a storm in that area, it would certainly not be having any troubles, as Amanda didn't, of course, reaching category 4 intensity last week. The western Pacific, there's a small area between the equator and around 10 degrees north that there's low shear until you get to around the Philippine area. In the area around the Philippines, low shear around the whole area there, but a small pocket of increasing shear just off to the east in the Philippine Sea, which will make things tricky for any systems entering that region. But where the storm is right now, that invest, not looking too bad for it, but not great either. Looking at the water vapour imagery, I completely forgot what I was going to say. Tropical Storm Boris, you can see there centred towards the left hand side of the image, a moist environment around the system at the moment, no real concerns with regards to dry air. You can see the expansive moist environment heading towards the north as well into the Gulf of Mexico and beyond. So here is Boris. It's difficult to get a centre on it looking at the latest imagery, but it is very close to the coast of Mexico right now, and it will continue to progress north inland. You can see lots of heavy rain from the storm displaced to the northeast over the Mexican province of Chiapas, bordering the border with Guatemala, and a little area as well towards the western part of the storm centre too, just about making landfall over the province of Oaxaca. At the centre of the storm is probably in a little bit of a lull in terms of the core of the system. It's displaced towards the north, which may be possibly a blessing in disguise, because if it was displaced to the south, then Mexico would have to deal with more storms coming in later on. The CMC model then takes the storm, weakens it very quickly, perhaps doesn't even make a landfall according to that one, so possibly a little bit inaccurate there. Not too much regarding development in the Atlantic on that. The GFS is a little bit more positive on Atlantic development. You can see a system moving through the Yucatan Peninsula, going the wrong way many would say, and then heading towards the northeast, and another system towards the northeast breaking off from that by the looks of things and heading into Florida. The ECMWF model doesn't have any particular system forming in the Atlantic. Boris dissipates rather quickly, and that's pretty much agreed upon by all of the models. The ECMWF doesn't predict any other systems forming either. The NavGen model takes the storm into Mexico. I think it's quite certain that that's going to happen now, but we're looking really on these models whether we'll see any further development of storms in the Atlantic or in the Eastern Pacific in the next 5 days, and the NavGem disagrees for the most part. The GFDL model takes the storm into Mexico as a weak tropical storm, and doesn't anticipate anything else forming, perhaps a little bit of disturbance in the Atlantic hugging the coast of Mexico, but then moving towards the north and dissipating completely. The HWRF model, rather similar as well, taking the storm into Mexico through there, possibly regenerating very briefly as a tropical storm in the Atlantic and then making landfall in Veracruz. These are what the forecast intensity models are saying. It's a little bit out of date just before it became Tropical Storm Boris, but you can see the blue line probably had it spot on really, is the only model to actually take it to Tropical Storm status, and that line takes it through Mexico and emerges out in the Gulf of Mexico, does a bit of a loop and then goes back into the Veracruz region. The red line is fairly similar but doesn't do that loop and goes a bit more directly towards the Mexican coast. Wind shear, the blue line, the HWRF model predicts high wind shear as it moves towards the north, and we saw on the shear map earlier that is very likely. Sea surface temperatures never going to be an issue for this system, 28 to 30 degrees Celsius all the way by the looks of things, unless it miraculously turns out to sea. And the relative humidity remains high as well, and that will be not a concern either for this system. The main concern, of course, will be land interaction, and that's what will stop Boris from intensifying. Of course, it's taken its time to do that already. We've seen very slow intensification and having a hard time getting organised. So June the 4th, what happened on this day? 1966, Tropical Storm Alma formed over Nicaragua. In 1968, 2 years later, Abby made landfall in Florida as a tropical storm. In 1979, Hurricane Andres weakened from a Category 2 storm and made landfall near Manzanillo as a hurricane in Mexico, pictured there below. In 1981, Adrian made landfall near Acapulco. In 1995, Tropical Storm Allison became a hurricane. There it is pictured approaching Florida. In 2002, Tropical Storm Noguri formed in the South China Sea. In 2004, Tropical Storm Conson formed in the South China Sea as well in the Western Pacific. And in 2012, Typhoon Mawar peaked as a Category 3 storm in the Western Pacific as well. Major hurricane intensity, its equivalent, with 115 miles per hour and higher. So you can track any storm that forms at the website force13.com/storm tracking is the main page. You can see so far the Eastern Pacific. Boris is our second storm. Amanda, of course, just shy of reaching Category 5 intensity. Boris will get nowhere near that. And indeed, we'll be lucky to see it intensify any further, or the Mexicans, of course, will be unlucky to see that. In the Western Pacific, our next name will be Mitag. Of course, we've had 2 typhoons there already and 3 other tropical storms. In the North Indian Ocean, our next name will be Nanak, should 94A form. And should any storms form in the southern hemisphere, it's certainly not likely now, at least not until the end of the year. The next storm in Australia is Kate, and the next storm in the southwest Indian Ocean is Girani. In Fiji, it's Newt. So you can visit the storm tracking page. This is what it looks like. It's sort of like a static version of what we have at the very start of these videos, and that will keep you up to date with any developments between now and the next video. And of course, Force 13's outlets, all the other outlets will keep you up to date as well. The website force13.com is always updated whenever I'm here, and the video sharing platforms YouTube and Dailymotion, search Force 13. You're probably watching this on one of those. And the social platforms, Facebook and Twitter, just search Force 13 on either of those. It's at Force 13 on Twitter. And if you want to talk tropics personally, you can do so on Skype at Fool13. And the next video will probably follow tomorrow, or if Boris has really degenerated, it will be the next day. That's all for now.